Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs? My name is Morgan Colby, as Rick did yesterday, or whatever show the last show was. Rick did all by his lonesome, starts and sits. Be sure to check that episode out. I am here alone today. This week, man, the schedules just couldn't line up well, but we still want to get you this fantasy football content, so we break them up and we give them to you. So it should be interesting. This particular show, it's always the best show of the week. We're hitting trade deadline season, usually between weeks 10 and 12. Everyone's trade deadline comes into play. So these shows later in the season become more and more crucial because, teams who are out of it, maybe they need to make some deals that will maybe get them into it, maybe go on a little bit of a run. Teams that are in the middle of the pack, 4-5, 5-4, even maybe the 3-6 teams, those teams need to figure something out, because if it goes the opposite direction towards the end of the season, it's over. And then those big superstar teams, 6-2, how many games have we played? 9. So that would be 6-3, 7-2, 8-1 or 9-0 even. The really, really good fantasy teams, those teams at this point should be getting prepared for the postseason, getting prepared for those big-time situations. So what you want to do in those circumstances is find players who have good playoff schedules and make trades with people in that. So for everyone, it's in a really, really important time of year. And you can also, if you're one of the better teams or the middling teams, you can maybe capitalize on a team that is freaking out about their team because it might not make the playoffs, or they got to win a bunch of games at the end of the season. You might be able to capitalize on that and make a deal with them to get a really, really good player. So, we're going to give you, or I'm going to give you, the buys and sells that we have for this week, guys that we're targeting in trades, guys that we're going after in trades, and then guys that we're selling and trying to pivot off of, whether it's because of, efficiency maybe going down, or because the player's ceiling is just reached at this point and you can probably get a lot out of them. So we'll go through that in a second. Before we do, please check out our website, fantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all social media platforms. Just check us out there. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, like and comment down below any questions you may have. If you're watching on a podcasting platform, please leave a review and then send this podcast over to one of your friends to say, hey, you give me this player. Might be a good idea. So, without further ado, let's jump into the starts and sits. The buys and sells that we have for the show. I got Michigan on right now on the side, by the way. So if I pause for a second to watch, that is what's happening. But anyway, so let's jump into this. We'll start with the buys and we'll go through a couple of different guys. And we'll start with Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So this guy's a little bit more frustrating. I think he's been on our podcast recently. But on the season, he's actually having a really, really good season. He's RB13. He started with 20, 21, 10, 18, 11, 13. And then the last 3 weeks is where the concern has come in. He got hurt against Tampa Bay, and it held him out of the game. He had 17% of the snaps, 0.3 fantasy points, obviously not great. Came back the next week, had 74% of the snaps, had 12 fantasy points. And then he had 61% of the snaps this week and had 5.9 fantasy points. So for the last 2 to 3 weeks, things have not been in a great position for Bijan Robinson. Like, things have been kind of trending down. And then we get all this stuff with Arthur Smith and how he doesn't necessarily want to put Bijan Robinson on the goal line, and Jair is getting opportunity. I think the big thing for me is that there's a couple of variables that you have to tie your hands with on the Bijan Robinson situation. And the first one to me is the Falcons are in a position where it's like the efficiency for Tyler Algier is not good. So smart coaches, I don't know if Arthur Smith is a smart coach, but just if you're in the NFL and you're a head coach, like, you have to understand certain aspects. And I think this is understandable. But the efficiency for Tyler Algier is not great. It's clear that Bijan Robinson is a better running back. The second thing is draft capital. You spent a very high draft selection on drafting a running back. That guy should be utilized in your backfield. And the third thing is ownership. I don't think that ownership is going to look at a high-value asset like Bijan Robinson, a guy that you drafted, and look at Tyler Algier, who's being inefficient, and say, hey, this is a good idea. We should just keep letting Bijan, sit behind Tyler Algier. So I think something at some point is going to flip because of those variables, right? He has to start getting the goal line work. He has to start getting a plurality of the carries. He has to start getting a majority of the work because he's the best player that they have. And I know Arthur Smith doesn't want to do it because of whatever the crap that he makes up in his brain. But at some point, ownership is going to step in and they're going to say, listen, we drafted this guy pretty high. Stop being a moron or you're going to get fired. And so Arthur Smith, I honestly, to me, even though they have an okay record, I think the Falcons are Arthur Smith might be on the hot seat after the season because just the way he acts and behaves, he's not a good head coach. He's not smart with his players. I understand mixing in personnel and having different guys, but doing dumb things like giving Tyler Algier the goal line work when you have a guy that's 215 pounds and 5'11" and Bijan Robinson, what are you doing? So some point, something's going to flip. They got to start getting him goal line carries. They're going to start giving him more and more opportunity. I think that's a positive. He also gets a lot of receiving work, so that's a plus in PPR leagues. You can plug and play him into your lineup, but he's definitely a top 7 to 10 running back in fantasy football who, if you can trade for say you have a wide receiver that's between wide receivers 12 and 15, like a DK Metcalf or something like that. I don't think you could get it done for Metcalf. You might have to give more, but if you can try to get a deal done with this person, because there's probably frustration, just like with the Kyle Pitts people. So I'd trade for Bijan Robinson now before things go. The other thing with Bijan too is, he has a lot of situations where, it's just when you're watching him, he's ridiculously talented. So it's he can turn, a 7-yard run that Algier would get tackled on into a 30, 40-yard run just out of his sheer talent and ability. I talked to Rick about this before, but if you play Madden, about the jukebox ability, and I always thought it looks kind of fake, but then you see Bijan juke somebody, and it's oh wow, that looks like Madden. So he kind of looks like a video game back, but he does have a lot of easier matchups down the stretch. He's going to get a lot of opportunity, and I think he should be a guy you trade for, even though he's been kind of not great the last 3 games and hasn't been performing. It feels like an eternity in football, in fantasy football specifically, if he's caused you to lose games. But I would try to trade for Bijan and get him on your team. The next guy is Dalton Kade. Man, this is an interesting guy because coming into the season, I don't like investing in the rookie tight ends. I really don't. And there's a couple of different players that I've looked at over the course of time where rookie tight ends don't technically work out in fantasy football a lot of the time. And you saw Sam Laporta early in the season kind of break out on a football team that needed a tight end. And now you're seeing the same thing with Kincaid. Now you have 2 rookie tight ends ranked in the top 4 in fantasy football rest of the season on Fantasy Pros. I kind of pivoted off that, and if a player's playing well, a player's playing well. I picked him up 3 weeks ago. He has been absolutely bonkers in terms of what he's been doing production-wise in fantasy football. And I knew it was only a matter of time before something flipped because he's getting a lot of targets. And it's clear that at this point, 3 weeks into this stretch of games since the Giants game, he has really kind of solidified himself as the number 2 weapon in the passing game for the Buffalo Bills. He had 8 targets against New England, 7 targets against Tampa Bay, 11 targets against Cincinnati. In those subsequent games, he had in PPR 15, 17, and 16 fantasy points. That stretch of games is very, very good. And when you look at the tight end position, right, just the last 3 weeks alone, that would make Dalton Kade the number 5 tight end in fantasy football. And he's been consistently doing that. I don't think he's going to be a dude that can get you 20, 25 points like a Travis Kelce usually does. But when you look at what Dalton Kade can do on a week-to-week basis, getting 14, 15, 16 fantasy points is really impressive. And I think right now, people aren't looking at, the team that has him probably values him highly, but they're still not looking at him as a top 10, tight end. So if it's possible to go get Dalton Kade in a trade and solve your tight end problems, I would do it, because it's not going to cost you the same it would if you were trying to trade for Andrews, Kelsey, Hawkinson, or one of those guys. So it's going to be cheaper than that. It's not going to take a lot. And I would, like I said, if you can get Kade, that can be the difference between, the crap tight ends that most of the league has and getting a real tight end in fantasy football that can have success. He doesn't have that same name value, and he doesn't have that same opportunity that you're talking about. So, he doesn't have that same name value that you're talking about with Travis Kelce. He has the same opportunity at this point. But when you're running that many routes, and you're getting that much opportunity, it just lends to, success. And I think the big things, too, that you talk about, like Kade had 15, 17, and 16 in the last stretch of 3 games. He only scored 1 touchdown. So, if he starts to become like a touchdown target, similar to how what Dawson Knox has been in the past, a red zone target, he's going to produce at a high level, and he's getting a lot more opportunity. So I think Kade right now is a superstar. I think he has the potential to be a very, very good tight end in fantasy football moving forward, and I think you should definitely try to go trade for him. I don't know necessarily what it's going to take, like I said, but it's definitely impressive to see what Kade has been able to do over the last 3 weeks without Dawson Knox in the lineup and with the opportunity. And I think it's just when you watch him in games, if you haven't watched a Bills game, watch one Monday night and watch how Kade plays, because he's very explosive. He makes ridiculous plays that a tight end normally wouldn't make. They got their dude here, and I think Kincaid's good. So I'd try to go after Dalton Kade in a trade if you can. The third and final buy that we have here is a little bit of a deeper guy, but it's Rashod Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, it's hard to purchase guys on the Kansas City Chiefs in the receiver room, because you kind of never know what you're going to get on a week-to-week basis. You could get 6-7 targets, or you could get absolutely nothing. Rice is going to be a cheaper buy. He's going to be one of those players that is a shot play. So if you're in a position where, you are, your fantasy team is kind of set, and you have a really good record, there's a chance that you'll probably make the playoffs, obviously, maybe even get a bye week or whatever. This is where it's a lot cheaper to go out and get one of these guys and see if the dude breaks out. Because if the dude breaks out, then by the time you get to the playoffs, if he's hot and he's playing well, you can start him as a flex. You can start him in any kind of position, and there might be opportunities for you to start like getting a lot of production out of Rashod Rice. Now, when you look at the early part of the season, he wasn't getting a very high snap percentage. And from week 7 to week 9 now, he's had 59, 61, and 68% snap percentage. So he's had an increase in snap percentage. Since week 5, he had 13, 11, 17, 9, and 9. And his target share has been right around 5 or 6 targets. In that space of time, if we take a look at it at the wide receiver position, what week did I say? It was week 5 against Minnesota. So week 5 to 9, the last, I think that's 5 weeks. Rashod Rice kind of fell into the wide receiver 20 range. So, he is a wide receiver 2 at that point on the Kansas City Chiefs. And the one thing I like about rookie wide receivers a lot of times is the second half of the season. You look at Amon-Ra St. Brown. St. Brown came in his rookie year, and he kind of was on the struggle bus for the first 6 to 10 weeks of the season. And then in the second half of the season, he was able to kick it into high gear, score a lot of fantasy points. And I even had his rookie year, I had a week where he absolutely exploded, and it basically got me a fantasy championship in a dynasty league because I had him. I think a similar thing could happen here for Rashod Rice, because the Chiefs' offense has not been great. I think they'll start figuring out, but what they really need is they need a number 1 wide receiver. And so to me, I look at Rashod Rice in this situation where it's like, if he does take a step forward and he does start getting targeted, he becomes a very valuable asset. Like if Mahomes starts targeting him 9-10 times a game instead of 5-6 times a game, then production will be there. I think the points will be there. And I think there will be opportunity for a guy like Rashod Rice to explode. And I think that's the thing, is if you get a similar explosion to what you saw from Amon-Ra in the second half of the season here, because that's usually what happens for rookie wide receivers. It takes them into their second half of the season to figure out kind of what they're doing. And then once they get their feet under them and they figure out how to run routes and do what they need to do, there's usually some positive things that happen and they start building on it. And I think I want to get Rashod Rice before that happens, because once that happens, like say it happens over the next 2 weeks where they're giving him more opportunity, they're letting him run more routes, they're targeting him a little bit more. Like if there starts to be a little bit of a separation here where he starts getting all of that stuff and then it starts turning into fantasy points, it's going to be hard to get him. So I would try to get him now while you have the opportunity to get him. His down the stretch schedule, obviously, he's in a bye week this week. So, it might be a little bit easier to get him if you eat the bye week. And then he's got Philly, which is going to be tougher. But after that, Raiders, not a great secondary. Packers are okay. Buffalo, they're okay depending on the week. And then you have New England, the Raiders again, and then you have Cincinnati and Los Angeles. So the schedule, isn't super difficult for him to break onto the scene and have success. But I'd go out and get Rashod Rice. It's not going to cost you a lot. It's going to be cheap, and it's more of a longer play. And if it doesn't end up working out, it doesn't burn your team in the long run. So that's the big thing. Is that it's not like right now, there are risky ads right now that you can make. And if you go out and you try to add that player at a huge risk, you know what I mean? It might burn your team. This is not a risky play because I don't think it's going to cost a lot to get Rice. He hasn't done anything yet that would be explosive enough for me to be like, oh yeah, well let's blow up the ship for Rashod Rice. All right, let's quickly go through 3 sells that I have for you guys. And guys that maybe you can use to go out and get some more valuable assets. I'm not saying some of these guys I do like and I don't think are bad, but I'm putting them here because I think they kind of peaked their ceiling, and they might still perform at their ceiling rest of season, but I don't think their value can get any higher. So it's like if you trade them now, you could get something in return for them. So let's take a look at the first guy, and it's Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. And so Kamara is an interesting guy. I love Alvin Kamara, and he's definitely an interesting dude. But he came into the season with a 4-game suspension or a 3-game suspension, and then he played from week 4 to now week 9. And from week 4 to 8, he had 21, 18, 17, 29, 27 fantasy points. He was producing. He's been getting around 3.5 yards per carry, so he hasn't been efficient on the ground, but he's still getting the pass catching work, which in PPR leagues is very, very good. This past week, his snap percentages went down to 49% against Chicago this past week. He still had 5 targets and 4 catches. He still got his receiving work, but his rushing was extra bad against a run defense that really isn't great. And now he's going up against Minnesota in the same boat. But it's clear that as guys start to, as this guy starts to get more opportunity, or not more opportunity, as some of these backup running backs like Kendre Miller, let's take a look at some of these guys. They have Kendre Miller, Jamal Williams. As some of these guys come back, some of that rushing work that he has been getting over the course of the last 5 weeks, 6 weeks or so, that's going to start dropping off. And snap percentages are going to drop. So while Kamara still remains valuable because of his PPR upside, he loses some of that rushing upside that he had, which turns him into a little bit more of a boomer bust kind of running back, which also turns him into a guy that has hit his ceiling, where it's like he might continue to perform as effectively as he has in the early part of the season here, you know what I mean, going into the second half. But likely to me, that doesn't happen. And so while we get into the important season of making trades, the important part of the season where you got to make the playoffs with 4 weeks, after this Sunday, there's going to be like 4 or 5 weeks left, and you got to make a deal before your deadline to kind of improve your team. Alvin Kamara, and you have Alvin Kamara is one of those dudes that somebody will come out and get from you because of the production and the upside. And you might be able to utilize him, and depending on where you drafted him, which probably is around I think he was going around 7 to 9. He wasn't starting for your team anyway. So to me, it's like if your team still has the guys that it had before and you're producing effectively with other running backs, then I would take Alvin Kamara. I deal him for a wide receiver. I get him for somebody that, can actually produce for you on a PPR level instead of being a guy that just gets 6-7 targets a game at the running back position. You can get a guy that gets 9-10 targets a game at the receiver position. Right now, he's ranked rest of season as an RB8, so you can definitely get a top 10, 12 running back in exchange for him. I mean, top 10 to 12 wide receiver in exchange. So I think that would be a smart deal for you. I would deal him. Like I said, he could still perform and play well, but I think just name value and the way he's been performing over the last 6 weeks, it's enough for you to look at him and be like, okay, it's time to sell. I'd sell him now and try to get something for him before maybe the wheels fall off and you lose that value. All right, let's talk about the next guy, who is Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, I like Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs has been really good the last couple weeks. He's moved up the rankings. He's actually gotten opportunity. But you look at the first part of the season. He had 8, 12, 9, 9. This is almost similar to like last season, Travis Etienne's early season run opportunity before James Robinson kind of lost the job. And Gibbs had an okay start to the season, but he wasn't really getting opportunity. He was efficient when, Montgomery had to be out against Atlanta, but he still only had 9 fantasy points. He didn't get a lot of receiving opportunity. They want to use him as the receiving back. And in the games that he's played on the season, he's only had the only 2 bad games he had were against Kansas City and against Atlanta. In terms of the opportunity that he got passing the ball. The first game of the season, I don't even count because he was a rookie and they were giving all the work to Montgomery. And then the game against Atlanta, they were blowing that team out. So there was no opportunity for them to actually, at least I think they were. I can't remember. But anyway, there's no opportunity for him to actually, get the ball through the air. All the other games where he's had the opportunity, he's had 9, 5, 10, 5 targets. So he's also been one of these PPR running backs. And the last 2 weeks, he's had 27 and 29 going into the bye. That's really good. That makes him a top 5 running back in fantasy football over those 2 weeks. And then he, like I said, he went into the bye week. So it's you look at Jahmyr Gibbs and it's there's, okay, he's breaking out. Things are coming. But the reason why he had these good games was because Montgomery has been out. And with Monty coming back soon, they're going to give the carries to Montgomery. They're going to give the goal line work to Montgomery. So all of this opportunity that Jahmyr Gibbs has gotten is kind of going to dissipate, at least with the groundwork. They're going to give him more work than they were giving him before, but he'll be around 12 carries. And to me, it's what you were getting out of him currently is not what you will be getting out of him in, 2 weeks or whatever when David Montgomery is back. So what I would do is, use this opportunity to sell high on Montgomery. I don't really want that Lions backfield. I'm scared of the Lions backfield. I don't think that there's upside in the Lions backfield. I've even thought about trading for David Montgomery, but I don't know what it's going to look like when Monty gets back. So it's when Monty gets back, what are we going to do? So there's kind of some issues here with this backfield where it's it's a committee, and there could still be some productive work for a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, where he could definitely have some opportunity to have success in fantasy football. We kind of compared this backfield in the past to Gibbs can be the Kamara and Montgomery can be the, Mark Ingram from back in the day, which is very true. If he keeps getting, around 6-7 targets a game, that's very true. You could get that kind of production out of him. And if he starts scoring receiving touchdowns and all that stuff, that could be really good for him. But right now, the goal line back is David Montgomery. So the touchdown upside, is gone for Jahmyr Gibbs. And really all you have is receiving. And I think at this point, you should sell Jahmyr Gibbs off the 27 and 29 point games here early in the season. So sell Jahmyr Gibbs when you get the opportunity. If you want to keep him in case something happens, that's fine too. But at this point, I think you should sell high to get something out of him. The final guy is Chris Olave, and this is going to be a little bit harder to sell, I think, because Olave's been good. Like, he's wide receiver 19 on the season. He started the season with 19, 14, 18, and then he had a 1-point game against Tampa Bay, a 9-point game against New England, and then he had 16, 12, 9, and 16. So he's been getting target share. He's been producing. He only has 1 touchdown on the year. Usually you would think this is a buy opportunity for, a player, because like if you're getting target share and you're getting the opportunity to do things like that makes it really, really interesting. But the big thing for Chris Olave is that, he's not getting he had 1 red zone target and he's not getting a lot of target share in the red area. And then he has 24% target share. And this past week, Michael Thomas only saw 1 target. So, if Thomas is in the game and playing, which I don't know if there is something up with him. I saw a report, but I don't know if it was fake last night that he was arrested. Yeah, that was fake. So he is, I believe he is expected to play Sunday. Yeah, so he was arrested on Friday, but he is still able to play on Sunday as possible. Thomas will face a suspension, but for now he'll be taking the field against Minnesota. So as long as he's on the field, it's not going to be one-sided moving forward. You're not going to see all the targets go towards, Chris Olave. And so I think that's the big thing for me, is it's going to be a split between the two guys. While I think Chris Olave is a fine player to have on your team, I think you can sell the target share to teams, because there are definitely teams. I know there's teams in my league that look at target share as if it's the same as fantasy points. So if you can sell that target share, that's really, really good. But that's the main argument for Chris Olave, is just the amount of targets he gets is huge. And he's been getting 9, 10, 11 targets a game. It's just not turning into anything, because the New Orleans Saints offense isn't great. And he's not like I said, he's only caught 1 touchdown, but I don't think that's going to change. Shaheed seems like the guy that they throw the ball to in big time down the field situations. And then Michael Thomas is their short field guy, which leaves, interesting opportunities for Chris Olave, and he always gets them. He gets the target share, which is great. But the issue is just how often do the Saints get into the red zone? How often are they going to score, and how often are they going to throw it into the red zone? And then you also have the targets that you're getting from Alvin Kamara, like I was just talking about. So it makes it a little bit more challenging for Olave to find the end zone. And if he's not finding the end zone, then what you got is a guy that's just a low-end wide receiver too, which is fine for fantasy football, but you need a little bit more than that if you want to have success. So I'd sell Chris Olave on that target share and see what you got. But outside of that, there are your buys and sells for Week 10. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. Be sure to leave a comment down below and ask any questions about trades. We love to hear questions about trades. But yeah, they're your buys and sells. Hopefully you enjoy Week 10 of the NFL season. If you're listening to this next week, you want to see, enjoy Week 11. See you later, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.